Chalomot, you're on the wrong side. So we said that we'd look at the 1802 mimer. So it's not a mimer, unfortunately. He didn't expand the way we would have hoped, and I guess that's the reason why in Torah Or they didn't bring this, because it's very short.
Yeah.
The
I
difference
have a question
is
about what we learned yesterday.
Yeah.
You said that a dream is a goal, like a circle.
Right.
Yeah, doesn't it? And real life is
Yosha.
long
Linear.
line, right?
Right, a line.
It says in Man Ways and probably lots of other places.
Yeah, it does.
So does that mean that the person who interprets it takes the circle and opens it out and turns it into a straight line? Because how do you change this metziut of impossibility into metziut of reality, if you want to use the word reality?
So here's the image that's coming up.
Why is your interpretation different to mine?
It's great. The image that we talked yesterday, he mentioned it at the very end, that Yosef is a poter chalamot.
Yeah.
And it said poter is tofer. Remember that? It was the very end. I didn't have much time to discuss it.
Okay.
So the very end he says that he's poter, to liftor chalom, you say to solve the dream.
Yeah.
And the poter means, he says,
Release.
tofer.
No, patur means
No,
release.
that's with the tet. Poter is with the taf.
Oh, okay.
So, liftor chalom, it's very hard to understand what this exactly means. What are you doing? So the way it's understood is that it's really, it itself is a permutation. You have to permute it to understand it. So it's really tofer chalamot. So he threads the dream.
Okay.
Litfo means to sew.
Okay.
So the image is like this, that you have, the dream is like a thread that's on the spindle.
Okay.
And the person who's interpreting it, in the word interpret, you hear poter.
Okay.
If you take the ayin prefix off. And so the interpret is like poter, or tofer, whichever you want. So he's taking the thread off the round spindle and making it into lines.
Into a garment.
Into garments. And the garments are always lines. Or even if you're just sewing things together, you're turning it into something straight. Or you're weaving it.
Well,
but
weaving is literally a lot of lines.
Can.
All pushed up.
So I wasn't talking about the garment itself. So connecting two garments.
Mm-hmm.
So you're sewing, and you're sewing in a straight line usually. And you're turning what was wound up into something that's straight. So what you're saying is that the duty of the interpreter, the one who's poter the dream, is to bring it into life, is to come and say, this is what it means.
But he has to give a good interpretation, because every interpretation...
Right. So in that sense, the dream is high. It is very high. And we'll see more about that today. And the interpreter is the person who brings it down. And translates whatever is translatable into waking life, into normal life. So in that sense, the idea is that the dream is tapping into a higher source of knowledge, which is called Igulim. And that's the Sovev later, that becomes the light that surrounds all worlds in the Alter Rebbe's thought. And the interpreter is the person who's turning it into Mamaleh, he's a Malbish. He's making it into a garment. So it's not the cloth itself, but it's to make sense. It's a very interesting image, that to make something into a garment, you have to connect things. You're tofer. So it's sort of like that. The person who's a good interpreter will bring things together. He doesn't have to invent the cloth. He doesn't have to make the cloth, but he has to somehow make it fit the one who's going to wear it. And that's the trick. That's the real trick. So that's a very beautiful image. I think that's amazing. I didn't catch that yesterday. Inyan HaChalomot. So here he says in 1802, the issue with dreams. נילאו הפילוסופים להשיג עניין החלום מהו. The philosophers, what he means by philosophers is natural philosophers, meaning those who study things from a natural point of view. Scientists of his day were called natural philosophers. They can't understand what is a dream. Why? So the first theory is that the dream is simply the imagination. That's pretty much what the Rambam says. The Rambam says that what you saw during the day, you'll dream about during the night. And the whole ninth chapter of, not all of it, but a lot of the ninth chapter of Brachos, it deals with all these things that people saw during the day. And there's Shmuel that once said to the head of the Babylonian Empire, Shmuel Malka, he told him, I'll tell you what you're going to dream about tonight. So he said, okay, how? So he thought it's a parlor trick. So you're going to dream about pink elephants. So he dreamt about pink elephants because he suggested that idea, and it became what he dreamt about. So that's the normal interpretation. The idea is that the dream is somehow residue from what you thought about during the day, or what you already know. But says the Alter Rebbe, this doesn't fully cover it. It's not a complete theory. כי הלא יחלום החולם מה שלא ראה מעולם ולא חשבו. Because it says sometimes when you dream things that you've never seen and you've never thought. It's just different. Granted, most of the dreams are residue. But once in a while, you have a dream that is different. It's just weird. It's not like anything. So the truth is, you can sort of tell what you're holding if you have new dreams or not. If all you have is just residue from the days and the remains of the days, so then said, oh, okay. But sometimes people have dreams that are much more than that. For instance, the dreams that we see in our parsha. That Yosef is dreaming that the sun and the moon come to him and they bow down to him. He's never seen that. He's probably never even thought that. But the other ones, that the bushels in the field and all the bushels bow down to his business. They bow down to his bushel.
Right.
Maybe they would bow down to him, so I wouldn't understand. They bow down to his bushel. It's very strange.
But the bushel's a day-to-day business.
And then at the end of the parsha, the bushels they make every day, that he knows. But by the way, they weren't farmers. They were shepherds.
Said it, but if you're a shepherd in the flocks and you see fields,
maybe you do, maybe you don't.
I mean, there was only two types of parnasa in the world at that time. Either agricultural produce or looking after sheep and cows.
Right. At the end of the parsha, it becomes even stranger. At the end of the parsha, we have the two ministers of Paro, the guy who's responsible for the drinks and the guy who's responsible for the bread, for the food. Right. And they have dreams that are really crazy. Right. They're really out there.
The Medrash explains all those dreams. So we're all referring to Am Yisrael.
Many explain.
It was all for Yosef. And Yosef didn't like the second dream, so he said, okay, so we'll get rid of you. And he was hung up. You've got to be very careful who you tell your dreams to.
So we'll see what this all means. So in any case, he says, it's not so simple just that the dreams are just residue from thoughts. It's true that most of them are, but some of them aren't. There are both true and false things in them. So if it's all false, it should be all false. Why are there suddenly things that do make sense? Why are there things that are normal? So again, you could say all this is the mind playing tricks because it's all the power of imagination. And in the power of imagination, part of it is true and part of it is not, and so on. And remember that he's writing this long before there are science fiction movies. And you know what? There's not even yet a science fiction genre. There's nothing like that. Mary Shelley isn't until 1840 something. So there's no even Frankenstein yet. Nobody even thought of creating a story that at its base would be real and it would have strange elements. Okay. Although, again, in the Gemara, when I think about it, it says that the dream has to have something false in it. Okay. So what are you saying? Are you saying that the rest of it is true? The rest of it can be interpreted as something true, but it doesn't mean that the rest of it is true events. It's not based on reality. So you have this strange situation that real things and unreal things are mixing. and this is all before we have anything that looks like science fiction in writing or anything like that. Even the fiction that we have, it's not the fiction that even existed, if there was any fiction then. I don't know how much fiction there was in 1800.
Interesting question.
There was not much. If there was, there was really not much. I don't think the Alter Rebbe ever encountered it. There was fiction because Shakespeare wrote, but not as a. But
that was wasn't really fiction. That was historical.
Yeah, but you invent stuff. Not everything is exactly accurate, but still, it was all within a certain reality. It all made sense inside the reality. Like the first time I think that people saw Star Wars or something like that, what shocked them, or at least what shocked me, was that here you have all these human dramas, regular human life, and the setting is weird. There's something wrong with the setting. What's going on here? Until you get to dystopias, until you get to, like the Matrix series is completely taking everything out of, that your whole reality is not reality anymore. It changes everything. So he's talking way before this. A long time before all this happened, 200 years before all this. But in truth, we can't define, he says, what a dream is. Truly, this is the issue with the dream. Dreams are the opposite of nature, and by nature he doesn't mean here they're the opposite of gravity, the opposite of sunlight. He means the opposite in the sense that they're the opposite of what you're used to. Teva here is like not nature with a capital N. It's like what your nature is with the lowercase n. What you're used to, what you've been habituated to see. The dream is different than that. It's the opposite of what's natural. And again, what's natural is what we've been conditioned to see in the world. And it has katnut shebegadlut vegadlut. It has two things in it, two elements. And this is where he starts using the Arizal's language. It has the small-mindedness of the great-mindedness, and it even has some of the great-mindedness. Katnut shebegadlut and gadlut. Katnut shebegadlut, he doesn't define what this is. Either you learned the Arizal or you didn't. So either you know what he's talking about or you don't.
And sure they have to remember that.
Okay, so here we see this is very different than how he writes later. Later he doesn't use, like in the Maimer we saw, he didn't use these terms at all. But these are the original terms, the way that the Arizal explained what dreams are. So we'll see them in a moment. So the fact that we have the opposite from what we're used to in the dream, opposite from what we've been habituated to see in reality, that is created because there is an illumination here from the concealed world. And what is the concealed world? The concealed world is seeing something from the static picture of reality, what we've been talking about, that there's no change, the no change picture of reality, where Hashem is constant and eternal. And that's called, he says, gadlut mochin. If you could see it clearly, it would be mamash gadlut mochin. It would be great-mindedness being able to see, and we'll see in a moment that that's really bina. That's understanding in the way that it's in the concealed world. אבל מה שהתפלא מן הנס השכל האנושי המוטבע בטבע האנושי זהו בחינת קטנות שבגדלות. But the point is that dreams affect you. And the question is why? Why do they affect you? And again, we're talking about 220 years ago. There's no movies yet. Today, nobody's impressed by anything anymore because we can create on the screen anything we want. We have these video games that are almost true to life. You can have anything today. But 220 years ago, the only place you could get a video game or a science fiction movie or anything was in your dreams. In your dreams. And just the fact that we're doing this now at will, on command, on our screens, that's got to tell you that this is the deepest state of gullus, of exile that ever existed. Because it's right in front of you. You turn on the computer, you get into this world. Everything is mixed. There's not. But in his time, the only way you could do this was in a dream. The difference is that we're not affected so much by the screen anymore. Because we've grown used to it. But in a dream, even if you are used to whatever, it doesn't matter what you're used to. If you have it in a dream, you're affected by it 1,000 times more. Meaning, if you see a horror movie, and you shouldn't, but if you do, then you may have, it may be scary for you at that moment, but you know that it's a movie. But if you then dream it at night, and you see it in your dream, that's a nightmare. And it doesn't even have to be so horrific. It's not that horrific. It never goes into, you can never see the details that you see on the screen in your dream. You never go to that level of detail. It's not gory in that sense. It's not scary in that sense. It scares you because it affects you in some way. In a way that you can't be affected when you're awake, as it were. So there's something there that, and he's saying this, the fact that you have hafla'ah, you have some excitement, it causes you excitement in the bad sense maybe, or the good sense, it doesn't matter, but you're excited by it. It stimulates you much more than any screen ever will. That is what's called the katnut shebegadlut. That means that at some level you are experiencing that higher world. But you're only getting a glimpse of it, so it's called katnut, so it's called small-mindedness. It's not really seeing the whole thing. Because if you could see the whole thing, well, you couldn't. It's just too much to handle at the moment. Here he says it in a simple way. It means that you're excited by the fact you'll see the water on fire, but you won't be able to research and understand why is it that the water is on fire. How is this happening? That you won't be able to perceive in the dream. You can't conduct physical experiments in the dream. You just can't do it. לאחר שנתפחו הצירופים של שמן למים. רק כשהוא רואה בעיניו שידליק המים את הפתילה, יתפלא כפליאה גדולה. But he's very impressed if he sees filling Hanukkah candles with water, and in his dream he sees himself lighting the wicks, and they light, and it's fine. The water is just as good as. But now you begin to understand what Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa did. When he said, he who told the oil to light will tell the, how do you call it, chometz, vinegar, to illuminate also, to be a source of fuel also. So he's going back up into the world of Bina, into the Amadit Kasya. And in the Amadit Kasya, there's no difference between the two. Like we said, there's no up or down. And that's what he means, that you can't figure it out. There's no logical, in this gadlut, even if you would see things for what they really are in your dream, you still wouldn't be able to understand how is it that the water is a source of fuel just as much as oil is. Because there's no linear thinking there. It's all igulim. That he did tell us in the Maimer that we read. Why? But because it's Almadit Kasya, because that's the world of igulim, that's the world of circles, and there's no rational thought there the way that there is in our world. But if I now tell it to you, and that's like the screen. So if I now tell you the story, in my dream, I saw myself filling the Hanukkah candles with water, and I lit them, and they just lit for hours on end. So you'll say, okay. But you won't wake up the way that I woke up. I can never transfer that amazement to you. I don't know if you saw this. There's a video on YouTube of somebody doing card tricks to a chimpanzee or to an orangutan. I don't remember what. How does a monkey, a primate, react to magic, which we know is not magic, so we're not impressed. But sometimes they're able to get a gasp out of us. But in general, we know it's all smoke and mirrors, nothing there. But a monkey doesn't. So there's a guy, a beautiful video. You have to see it. The ape is looking at him doing a card trick. And, you don't have to understand much. A monkey can get it. And you see that he finishes the trick, and the monkey for a second is like, huh? You see it doesn't register, and suddenly he gets it. He's like, he blows up. He jumps around. He can't. What happened here? What happened? He understands that what he saw it's not from this world. It's magic. So the place where you see the dreams in the ancient world is in magic. I don't know if you probably never read him. Lynn Thorndike. He's the biggest researcher of magic and witchcraft ever. So I have his 8-volume set here. 8 volumes on the history of magic. The reason that it interested me was not because I'm so interested in magic or in witchcraft, but early on when I started my academic studies on science, I came across his writings and I came across a paper I think that he wrote on something. And in it, just in a footnote or something, he mentioned a thesis of his. And it fits so well that I just had to read what this guy had to say. He says that technology is the evolution of magic. That's what technology really is. Man has always been trying to manipulate reality. So in the past it was done by alchemy, by magic. But the result was supposed to be the same always. That the inanimate would change.
Turn lead into gold.
What?
Turn lead into gold.
Yeah. By the alchemists, I'm convinced today that they never tried to turn lead into gold. They weren't talking about that. The fools understood they were trying to turn lead into gold. What they really meant was that gold was considered to be a higher state of matter, and lead was the lowest state, like we say, oferet. It's like afal. And the idea was, how do you turn a foolish person into somebody who illuminates? And for them, it was knowledge. It was the word, because that's how their holy book starts. First, there was the word. And they understood that the goal of man, by the non-Jews, the goal is to become intellectual. And that makes sense, because like we say in the Tanya, today's Tanya, that a nefesh hashenit b'Yisrael yichelek eloka mimal mamash. That in the Jewish people, the second soul is the divine soul. Again, it depends on how you read it. But the Rebbe spoke about this punctuation, and he said that there's a tradition that's how you need to punctuate it. That in the Jewish people, in Israel, the second soul is the divine soul. What's the second soul in the non-Jew? It's the intellectual soul. So for a non-Jew to move from a brute to an enlightened individual, you can't say a godly individual, but you can say an enlightened individual. That is to transform them from lead into gold. And so the whole pursuit of alchemy was no different than the pursuit of knowledge today, which is driven best in the end, probably it's driven best and best understood by the masses when you connect it to technology, when you connect it to some kind of transformation that the person can see. So if a person holds up a cell phone and he doesn't get that there's something ridiculously deep here, okay, and the world is not about watching YouTube videos, but you can actually understand something about nature. You can actually manipulate nature. You can change. So if you could take Earth and turn it into something like this, you can't take a human being and turn him into something enlightened. It should be 1,000 times more. So anyway, so he was the one, I think, that developed this thesis, and that's why he studied it in the context of science. He wanted to see how there were parallels between, he lived in the early 1900s, so I don't know how much technology he saw, but he saw the steam revolution for sure. You may have seen flight. But then all the all the reports of magic suddenly take on different meaning. That magic is really meant to be, in the vulgar sense, it's meant to impress you. But in the higher sense, it was meant to expand your horizons. It was meant to make you dream. It was made to make you want to change. And that's really what it is. And that's what's called tzirufim. Tziruf, what does the Torah say? The Torah says, Lo nitnu mitzvot, ela letzaref ben et habriot. Why were the mitzvos given? Because that's how you refine. It's very interesting that the word refine is what you do to lead, to gold, to earth, and you take out. So the whole purpose is to refine you. To refine what? My intellect? No, for that you need magic. It's to refine your divine self. Because the mitzvos will change the animal soul and make it serve the divine. So that's how you refine the animal soul, but not to the level of intellect, not to serving the intellect, but to serving the divinity. And that's what it means in today's Tanya, that the second soul in the Jewish people is the divine soul. Because what we want to refine is in order to not to achieve gold. Gold would be like the intellectual soul's refinement. But we want to achieve something that's even higher. What's even higher than gold? I don't know.
Uranium.
Bitcoin. I don't know. But in any case, that's the idea. So that's what's meant by tzirufim. The tzaref et habriot is literally to refine them. That's the image. So they're using the same image as alchemists. But Chazal mean not in the sense of getting to, by the way, how could you turn lead into gold? What did you need? The thing that was needed in order to do this?
Fire.
No. You must know at least that much magic. You're from England. All of England is like alchemy. Why did England develop? Because of Merlin. We've talked about this in the past. Why did the English-speaking nations, everybody that came out of England, advance the world so much? Without proportion to anybody else. Why? What was so special about England? One of the theses you could bring up is because of the impact that magic had in England. You don't see, I'll give you an example. Harry Potter could not have been written in France.
Okay.
It certainly could not have been written in China. And the last place on earth it could have been written is here. Why? Because these are degrees of how much magic is part of your culture. So China is very rationalist. So they have this other side to them, that's weird with the dragons and stuff. But they understand it as myths. But the English didn't. I think that simple people didn't get it. But it affected them tremendously. And they all knew that the core of alchemy is the philosopher's stone. That's the whole point. The whole thing is the philosopher's stone. What's the philosopher's stone? Knowledge. That's all it is. The philosopher's stone is like how you translate from one language to another, from one area of knowledge to another. It's translation. That's what tziruf could also be. It's like translating you, transforming you from one thing into another. That's what knowledge does for you. That's why Oxford was so good, because they did stuff that nobody else did, because, always the joke that it wasn't a joke, it was a serious rift in science in the late 1800s between British empiricism and continental idealism. And nowhere on the continent in Europe did they get that science should be practical. They didn't get it. They just didn't get it. They didn't understand how to study, how to research. So the British were empiricists.
The French did good.
No, they didn't.
Yes,
They did awful.
Voltaire and
But it's entirely idealism. There's not a Voltaire. First of all, Voltaire was different. You're right. Voltaire, relative to the rest of the French Academy, was much more practical. But everything in the Royal, there was no Royal Society. It was something else they called it in Paris. I don't remember what it was called. So everything there and in Germany was all based on mathematics, on idealism. They didn't actually go into the practical applications. In fact, they thought that dealing with the practical, Duhem was a French philosopher of science and also a physicist. He wrote a lot about it, and he said we're going to fall so far behind because we keep doing these theoretical things, and that's not how you do good science. Good science has got to be empirical. You have to get into the lab and you have to invent something. And that's why America pushed ahead so far, because America didn't even care for the empiricism. All they wanted was the practical money side of it. How do you monetize this? That was the only question they asked in America. They didn't care. Edison didn't research light filaments for the heck of understanding light filaments.
no, make a light bulb.
He wants to make a light bulb, wants to make $1 million. That's what he wants to do. That's all. In America, that's all it is. And suddenly you see, we're going back to Avram and his 400 shekels, that when you give money to people, suddenly they begin to understand very deep principles. It drives the world. That's why capitalism is so much better than any other system. Because if you don't have capitalism, you stop knowledge. It's weird. It doesn't make, you can make all kinds of arguments that it's not true. But the fact of the matter is that that's how it is. China can't invent anything. There's no, say it another way, the USSR couldn't invent anything. They were stealing everything. They had better scientists from Germany or whatever. That's how they got ahead a little in 1959, 61, 62. But then they fell behind completely and everything fell apart. And America just kept going further. And England, when it caught up with capitalism, and it's still a little bit socialist, but when it caught up to a certain degree of capitalism, it also contributed. Australia, same thing. And China learned from the mistakes of the other communist countries, and they said you have to have some level of personal freedom, because otherwise there's no innovation. If people can't pursue money, they can't pursue knowledge. It's a strange thing. I don't understand why, but that's how it is. You would think that people would do much better if you would just give them a stipend and tell them, here, innovate.
Don't work like that.
It doesn't work. It's so weird, but it doesn't work. So this is the idea of magic in the end being, because magic has an end result. That was Lynn Thorndike's idea. It has an end result that you want. So that for the Goyim is really the apex of being of the second soul, the intellectual soul. And for that you need the philosopher's stone. If you didn't see the miracle or you didn't see the dream, lo yitpaleh klal. You're not impressed by it at all. Because in the end it has to be practical. It has to have it can't be something just theoretical, which is why I go back on what I said before. People can look at a cell phone in Africa, and they don't care. They don't even begin to imagine. So what is the mathematics that allows a signal? What is a signal? What does it mean to turn information, or to turn reality into information into bits? It doesn't mean anything to them. How can you take a piece of glass and make it show a picture? They don't care, because they're not seeing the magic. What they're seeing is, you're telling them, there's something here. Okay, there's something here. And he won't be affected from the fact that nature is acting differently here. Rather, he sees it as this is just a natural piece of the world. This is how it is, and that's how we see our screens. That's just the way it is. I don't understand what's going on. There's nothing impressive here. And that's what it means to be a katan. Katnut means that if I give a $100 bill to a 3-year-old, it's a piece of paper. If you're going to use it for lighting a match, that's also fine. Light it up with a match. He doesn't care. He doesn't understand. Kayadua. That's the well-known mashal, that a katnut means that you don't understand the meaning of what you're given. A katan is somebody who can't appreciate what he's doing, what he has in his hand. But in a dream, everybody has some level of katnut, of gadlut here. So there is some impression, you have some impression, but you don't fully understand it. You remain oblivious to what you saw. You are not oblivious, but you remain indifferent to what you saw. You don't fully understand it. And that's what it means, that you can't appreciate what you saw in the dream. So all this is, we have to end. You have to go. So we didn't get to the Arizal.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow was option.
You're going to know tomorrow?
Yeah. So tomorrow we'll see how it is in Arizal, because this...
Hanukkah.
No, so the next week we'll do Hanukkah.
We have to lighten up the world.
Yeah, it'll light up the world. Trust me. Say no. So we'll meet again tomorrow.
Very